Welcome, everyone. It is Tuesday night, 7 p.m. Central Time, time for Outlawed Live. I'm your gracious host, Ron Stone, with my co-host, Mike Idle, stationed up there in the show-me state of Bevier, Missouri.
Yep. Ron, how's it going? We had a weekend off of pulling. What an interesting feeling.
We did. I actually was up in your neck of the woods.
You were in Greencastle, weren't you?
Friday, yeah. Played a gig up there with the Riker boys, and
they're good.
Had a good time there. Actually met some pulling folks there while I was there as well. So some pulling fans. Some folks said they were going to Unionville on Friday. Of course, that's our next stop, Friday at 6 p.m., Putnam County Fair, Unionville, Missouri. Big weekend, actually. Let's pop that.
Yeah.
Those ads up there. 6 p.m. start on both pulls. Unionville on Friday and Buckner on Saturday. Both two-track events. Unionville, 2 tracks, all outlaw classes. Buckner, 2 tracks, outlaw, and Missouri State tractor pullers. So big weekend coming up. I'm ready for it. After a weekend off, I'm ready to go pulling again.
It's been 2 weeks for me, Ron. I haven't been at a pulling track since Wisner. You got Madison, South Dakota to tide you over there for a little bit, and I'm forgetting what diesel fuel smells like and, watching them pack a perfect track. So let's get back at it, boys and girls.
You got to be jonesing a little bit, man.
I am. I'm not going to lie. I truly am. I'm getting a little jittery. It's a funny feeling. So, we got to soak it up while we can, because the end, Ron, I remember doing podcasts and we were talking about we were 30 days away from the start of the season and 10 days away from the start of the season. Right. And now, doggone it, if that number isn't starting to, rear its ugly head in the other direction. So soak them up while you can, folks, because the days are getting shorter.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, the Outlaws, we go deeper into the fall than most organizations do, where NTPA's wrapping it up and PPL's about to wrap it up. We've got this weekend, we've got next weekend, and then we've got the last weekend of October. So we go clear into late October before we end the season. So, of course, all great pulls coming up. We have 2 this weekend, 2 next weekend, and then Lufkin in October. We had Ken Summers from Buckner on last week. We had Tanner Michael from Unionville on last week, and I seen they were on Beer Money last night, and I think they might have been on Beer Money on Let's Grow Bowling last week as well. I thought I would give those guys a break.
Yeah, I was wondering, sometimes we can promote these events, and I love it, but by the time the promoters are done promoting, they turn into social media influencers themselves. They're miniature celebrities because they spend so much time on the internet along with us.
And of course, like I said, both those events start at 6. There was a change. So if anything out there says 6:30, just remember both events start at 6. I think we've got all that changed on the app. Let's see here.
Another thing people might be curious about or talking about, and I know we received this text message yesterday, and I'm sure you've got this in your agenda to talk about, but Spencer, which will be not this weekend, but the following weekend, is a single session. So that's something we want people jotting down and making sure they're understanding. Ron, as I know it, that's been a 2-session pull in the past. Is that right? Now,
right. And literally, Mike, they've had 2 tracks there. They get both tracks ready. They pull an early session on one track. It's like a 2-hour break, if that, between the 2 sessions. Then they start the late afternoon session on the second track. So we talked to them at the convention and said, why not run them both at the same time?
Sure.
Give everybody more bang for their buck. Yep. There'll be no break in the action, or very few breaks in the action. And then the folks can get back out onto the midway, and go buy a corn dog.
And with it being a Sunday pull, a Sunday afternoon pull, and that lets everyone crown their champions. And, when you run those 2 sessions in one day, and we've seen it at Rock Valley and various other places, that break between the 2 sessions is it almost feels like you just did one great big session from noon to 11 anyway. So you might as well just run what you brung and roll with it.
It makes for a long day. It really does.
Yeah.
And you're getting right there into harvest. You're in harvest time.
Yeah.
Of course, a lot of our guys are farmers and they're chomping at the bit to get the heck home anyway, so they can get back in the field. So I think it's good to have that one session, and kudos to them. Because we suggested it and they said, yeah, it makes sense. Let's do it. Not every promoter does that. So
sure.
a lot of promoters have their own way of doing things, and it's nice to have folks that will take that those suggestions and run with them there. So let's check out some of our she's talking about me singing up there on Friday. Thank you.
How was the traffic in Greencastle? Was it pretty dense? Were you able to find your way around that big metropolis, or did you have to stop several times and ask for directions?
I'm guessing it was the fairgrounds on, I think the south side of town. So
rodeo grounds. That's old rodeo. They used to have a tractor pull there.
Yeah, I thought about that when I was there, but literally as you pulled into town, boom, it was right there.
Yeah.
On the right. So yeah, wasn't a huge crowd of people, but I think everyone had a good time.
That's what it's all about.
And of course, there were 2 highway patrol just stopping people as they pulled out of there towards the end of the night. They were warning everybody not to go out and drive. Of course, I was good to go. So, but thanks for coming out to that. Dick Blank Sport watching from Inwood, Iowa. Cole and watching from Wakefield, Nebraska. Ben Beller. In the grain cart. Speaking of harvest, in the grain cart. Corn out there in Howard, Kansas. David Sean Reed watching. I think he's going to try to campaign 2 vehicles next year, Mike. And he's looking for a driver, I think, for that 2-wheel drive. So, if you want to do some driving, give David a call.
I've been more open to that idea. People give me a hard time about that, and they're like, when's Mike going to get behind the wheel of a vehicle? And I feel like you guys are starting to give me a false sense of confidence. It's to the point where you guys might need to be careful what you wish for, because if someone brings me a fire suit, maybe I just do get a little froggy one of these days.
Okay, Jenna says, hoping to bring a tractor pull back to Greencastle. So have the powers that be give us a call.
Yep.
Robert Miner watching from Niobrara, Nebraska. Margaret Wood says hello. So awesome. Thanks everybody for watching tonight. We've got a lot of people watching, and I wanted to touch on something tonight, Mike, that
why not?
I don't think we've ever really talked about it on here, and it's kind of the third rail, if you will, of pulling. It really brings out a lot of emotion and a lot of mixed feelings on the subject, and that's traction control.
Rumors. Boy, Ron, when you say those words, my mind is just flooded with he said, she said, and misconceptions and accusations. There's a lot to unpack here. Let's tell us what's on your mind, Ron Stone.
Well, I know it's going to come up in the rules meeting, and I know it's a serious subject. Is traction control, and I'm just going to go back a little ways here. I'm going to go back to my days in drag racing. Young man right out of high school. I had a 68 Chevelle, and I loved pulling and I loved drag racing. And at that time, it was easier for me to get into racing than it was into pulling. It was just less expensive for me to do so. I had the car, so I started racing. And at that time, the delay boxes and the stutter boxes were all just kind of coming out and really starting to spread out around the country. Now, basically, these were computers that, with a lot of sensors, they set them up. You actually punched in your opponent's dial in, and you punched in your own dial in, and it literally would not let the car break out in bracket racing. If you know anything about bracket racing, you set your dial in. Let's say you set it at 7 seconds, and the computer won't let the car run faster than that time to keep you from breaking out. Now, at that time, they were on the fence. The racing organizations, should we outlaw it? Should we allow it? And then generally it just came out, well, everybody's already spent a lot of money on it. We'll just allow it.
Okay.
So now, and I'm not trying to offend anybody out there in drag racing, because I still love drag racing. There are some classes I can't stand to watch because it literally is a computer
pulling and drag racing, I would say, have more in common than pulling and roundy round racing. And I feel like a lot of the technology that's made its way onto our tracks was inspired, and I think we've inspired each other in both ways.
So going back to that, now you have in drag racing, you have these delay boxes and stutter boxes, and you have these throttle plates that go into the carburetor that actually limit the fuel going in. The computer does that. So literally the driver, he's steering and he's mashing the throttle, and the computer is doing the rest on some of these vehicles. And it takes the driver kind of out of the, the driver all he has to do is steer it. So I think, personally, the driver should be a big part of the equation. The decisions the driver makes going down the track, before and after, but definitely going down the track. But can we regulate traction control? And we got Kyle Petch waiting, and he's going to come on. He's a computer programmer, and he knows a lot about computers. So
when we talk traction control, and let's kind of dial in here. So I have heard this talked about from a fan's perspective, and I'm hoping we can dive in more and just talk about what it actually means. But I hear it thrown around in the 4-wheel drive truck class, but also in like the light super stock class. So are we talking an advantage that's going to allow like an offset slip and pull in a class with all 4 on the ground, or are we looking in one where maybe once the nose comes up to equalize our rear traction? What are we, in what capacity, or give us some more of a hot and dirty of what it looks like in tractor pulling?
Well, Mike, the way I see it is it could literally come down to, with the sensors are already there, with these data loggers and these race packs, they're already monitoring drive, shaft speeds and wheel speeds.
Sure.
And a lot of your traction control actually has, accelerometers and GPS and things like that. And why couldn't a computer steer the tractor, let's say, through the brakes? And we'll go a little bit farther than that, but I think the technology's there. And let's bring Kyle on and pick his brain a little bit.
I can see him. I can see his wheels turning. He is just he's saying, boys, I can explain the technology.
So Kyle Petch from Milford, Nebraska. How's it going, Kyle?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Thank you.
Good to see you again, Kyle.
You brought up a very interesting subject here.
Yeah. I called it the third rail today because I think it is. We always hear about it, and there's always finger pointing, but you never really see the direct finger pointing. It's always, well, so-and-so has to be, or you know what I mean? So we were starting to get into the nuts and bolts of it here, and I want to go ahead and bring you in before we got too deep. So computers and the sensors, where do you think the limit is with traction control? What can't it limit?
I think the sky's kind of the limit with some of it. Because I go back to just sitting there listening to you. Everything that you were mentioning, I'll tell you right now, I'm monitoring it on my tractor. The drive shaft RPM, the tire RPM, the accelerometer, GPS speed, and we're using all of that data to make decisions before we go to the track again. Are we geared properly? Are we, even balance of the tractor? There's inclometers that you could, measure the position, the height of the front end. There's lasers out there that could measure the height of how far that front end's getting off the ground. So there's all kinds of different sensors and data points that you can get out there. And so at that point, it's like right now, for those of us that have data recorders, we're using that to manually change things before we go to the track again. See how things worked, didn't work, things like that. So when you ask kind of where that limit is, I think it just becomes a limit of how many sensors do you want to put on your tractor and how big's your data recorder and things like that. The flip side to that then is, okay, at what point can I use that data in real time going down the track? And, that's where you start getting into Is it traction control? Is it controlling the tractor? And, really, there's other systems out there that can monitor and control things. PDMs that will basically get rid of all your fuses and relays and everything off your tractor and turn things on or off based on what you've got. And as we looked into that, really up to this point, as long as it's not what we'll call drive by wire, where my throttle is still a mechanical linkage to the fuel control on my turbines, or the on a alcohol motor up to the butterflies and fuel valves and stuff. The moment you kind of introduce some kind of logic tool in between that, that's where things start to kind of get hairy with that. And I will say it's a fear out there, and it may be a fear of the unknown a little bit. As you're capturing all of this, and hey, we've got a computer on our computer that's doing stuff. Is it doing other stuff? Is it actually controlling the speed of that engine? Is it applying brakes? These are all things that can happen with that. And so it truly comes down to where do we want to draw that line, or where should that line be drawn? Tractor pulling, Ron, you brought it up at the beginning. It is really seen as a driver's sport. There's so much of coming off the line and doing things. And, one of the things I've done with my tractor, you get to looking at it, you walk up to it, I've got 4 brake pedals down. And people are always like, why do you have 4 brake pedals? Well, left and right steering brakes, but on a turbine, we use an output brake to hold the turbines on the starting line. And as the power increased on that, we always had a hard time kind of holding it on the line. So I put another set of calipers on the rear of our tractor, and I put a 4th brake pedal in there. So when I press that, it holds. Well, as I'm coming off the line on a really loose track once in a while, I can stand on that brake and kind of hold it back a little bit. But I am still in control of that. Right. As a driver, I'm controlling that. But, nothing says that later on you can't have some other kind of device that, hey, once you've reached this acceleration, hey, we'll just open up a solenoid and we'll release pressure off the brakes and we'll go. So there's all kinds of things there that can be done. And it's truly deciding what is and where do you draw that line.
Yeah, what is brake control, manipulating the brakes by computer? Is that traction control?
In my mind, that would still, it depends on the logic that you use. Is it something that I've predetermined, just like if I put some kind of a pressure relief valve, if I go and pump that pedal up and the moment I let off of it, well, there could be a manual valve there that just says, hey, let's take 10 seconds to release that pressure every time. Maybe next time I want it to be 5 seconds or 15 seconds. Well, what's the difference between that and having a computer open that up? But the difference is we could look at the acceleration of a vehicle and say, or the RPM off a tire, and make those changes. So it gets very interesting.
And I think we actually talked about this, Kyle, the other day we were talking about traction control in our meeting. I said, we need to be prepared for the traction control arguments that are going to come up. And, the steering the tractor down the track, in specifics, a tractor and not like a 4-wheel drive truck or a 2-wheel drive, where you actually, if you had a computer program, I think it would be possible you could drive it without even having to steer it if a computer controlled the brakes. And if it started to go right, the left rear, got more traction, and the right rear, it started to go right. The computer can come in and manipulate those brakes to steer it back.
And then you can. It's right now today. A lot of them are reading left and right wheel speed, along with drive shaft input speed.
And then I'll go a little bit further with this, and this technology could come back, but we're talking in the 80s here, Kyle. There was a guy in Ohio, Wheeler Rittinger, that had a twin Donovan tractor, and the engines were offset, and he had 2 drive shafts going back. He had 2 rear ends mated together. And don't know if there was like a differential in between those, but there were 2 ring and pinions, and he had a helicopter joystick that he used to manipulate power to those motors to steer them. He would, give more power to the right engine to try to go left. Now, imagine using that setup with the technology we have now with computers. You wouldn't even have to use the brakes. It would just use the power from the engines.
Yeah.
So,
there's all kinds of different things. You start letting the mind kind of run wild with some different things.
Because I'm going down the rabbit hole now and thinking so much of this goes beyond traction control. This goes into what you could do with all aspects of things. So like a question I would have is water injection. And when diesel burning, like a diesel super stock, when they're running water injection, is that a manual injection, or are they running a temperature? And once the temperature hits a certain point, then it's got a sensor that just automatically injects water.
Yeah, there's things happening like that with boost pressure and things like that.
So if you argue that that's allowed, I'm happy to not be the rules guy.
So you start getting into that point of computer control this and that. Those types of things, you can really kind of start to justify that for longevity of engines and keeping vehicles on the track and things like that. I think that's a little bit different scenario, but it uses a lot of the same technology.
Sure. A lot of conceptually the same ideas. Now, as it stands, traction control right now, and I really, I'm a door slammer. I like the 4-wheel drive truck class. It's illegal, and it's one of those things that there's a pretty tight foot put down on it. But as Ron says, there's always kind of been wonderings and whatnot, and so, but at this point, it's not allowed. But are we looking at, depending on how you define it, certain things could be allowed so long as they're not how we define it now? Is that kind of where we're at then, or?
I want to be careful in how I say something, because it is a very kind of touchy subject a little bit. With it. Basically stating, hey, Outlaws is the group I know, and it's very clearly defined as about as well as you can in the rule book of what we're considering traction control. And I think if you look through there, about every class has some statement of no traction control allowed in it. But as some of these vehicles start to come out and there's more technology, I think it's something that we continue to just talk about and really define better. Hey, this is a capability now that's truly here. Do we accept it? Don't we accept it? Exactly. How would you police it on a drive-by-wire machine? Exactly. The policing of it is another big aspect of.
Yeah, and that was where I was going to go next, is actually policing it. And if you look at, we actually have a system. I don't know if a lot of people know, we actually have a system that was designed to detect traction control. Now, from what I've heard, we still don't have all the components that go with it. But I think it's designed to detect ignition pulses from the ignition system. But in saying that, you're a computer programmer, Kyle, and why couldn't, once that system's in place, why couldn't there be another system put in place on the vehicle to fool that monitor?
Yeah, it's one of those. It's kind of like all computer software a little bit. Once you fix a hole or a bug that gets exploited by a hacker, hey, they just work a little bit harder and they find the next hole with it. And that's, in my opinion, of some of this is just the cat and mouse game that's going to continue to happen. Once you've got a tool that I think can say it detects and solves and stops this, you're just going to just advance things that much more and become that more sophisticated. And there's in my opinion, always going to be somebody with enough money that can make something
that can circumvent it. Correct. And is that where we need to go? And that's kind of why I wanted to do this show tonight was kind of get some pullers, get their opinions on this. Is it going to be a cat and mouse game where every year we have to get a new program to try to catch the programs that are trying to circumvent our program? And I'll go back to, I'll use this as an example. My uncle, my dad's brother, was kind of a genius, and he knew all about radar detectors and radars and things like that. And there was a company in Cincinnati Microwave, that pretty much made all the radar detectors that were out there, but they also made the radars. So every year there'd be a new radar detector that can detect this certain radar. Well, the same company was coming up with another radar to be better than the radar detector they had just put out. And then they put out another radar detector that sensed that. So the same company was going back and forth and selling the radars to the police forces and selling the detectors to the consumers and making a killing.
That's like the opposite of robbing Peter to pay Paul. That's like Peter and Paul. I don't even know what the saying would be, but it's genius.
Jimmy Deaverman said, the 3 O's, talking about the limited pro diesel pickups. Everything goes back to the P pump. So, where that's what I want to get. I want to get opinions on where do you go? Do you just say, throw your hands up and say, let it be what'll be? Or do you spend the money every year to try to monitor those systems?
Yeah, there's the way I see it, there's 2 schools of thought here. The first one is we truly want to just keep it a driver sport, seat of the pants, and it's all mechanical and everything. This question right here is identical to this. There's modern stuff here today that if you wanted to use it, you can't, because that doesn't work. So you look at more of a modern stance, and people that are coming along now, that's all they know is this modern computer controlled age. And that's how you tune things. It's with a computer, it's all of that. And that's just the way it is. So you've got 2 different sides there. I'm not picking a side today.
Come on, Kyle.
It's one of those. It's truly, you weigh some pros and cons of that, and there's advantages to the computer side. I myself is that really intrigues me. I'm gathering this data. I'm using this. Hey, why shouldn't I be able to use a little bit of it somewhere? On the flip side, hey, somebody else may not even be able to fire up a laptop, but you also look and go, well, that same guy may not be able to, adjust his valves either. So it all becomes, I'm glad you brought this topic up, Ron, because hopefully it does really start to just have some good conversation about it, and not feel like, hey, we're targeting any one class, anything like that. It's just, it's an overall conversation. I'm coming at it of a perspective on the modified side. And, I truly don't think I haven't heard much discussion of this being an issue in our class, or even really talked about a whole lot. Other classes, I know it is. So I want to see us to keep kind of having this conversation here a little bit.
Yeah, and it's not something that there's not just a big box there that's you see wires going into that says traction control on it, and wires going out the other side. It's technology. I mean, I've got a computer right here in my hand. I've got a computer here, and it's like the things we can do now. And Kyle, this, and all that technology can be put inside an ignition box or a very small space, and I'm sure disguised and hidden. So how do you find it if you don't have something to monitor it? So, I just want competitors to know that too, that's a very intense, labor intensive to go looking for something and not find it. So you really would have to have something that could detect it, and then can you detect it? So, I don't know where I fall. Of course, I fall in the category, I want the driver to be part of that. I want the driver to have a big part of the pull. I want them, the driver can mess up, or they can blow a motor or whatever. The driver has to be part of that equation. But are we just chasing our tails, trying to stop the inevitable?
Yeah.
I was wondering that. And at the end of the day, do you have to say what's best for the sport as a whole? And us, working with the Outlaws this summer has totally changed my perspective, where you see it on more the production side. And everybody wants to see 9 to 12 vehicles in every single class running a good competitive show. So whatever the rule in anything had to be, if it's something that benefits class numbers and helps put on a good show, you might have to be willing to swallow some things or accept some things that maybe your gut, as a driver, competitor, promoter, whatever, you wouldn't have 15 years ago, so.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't see traction control as being a guarantee of a win either. That's what
I was wondering. I was thinking that maybe it's not.
I think it could increase
the end all be all
for sure. I mean, I'll go back to the drag racing example I gave earlier. I was an 18-year-old kid just out of high school racing at a drag strip, and this guy that had a delay box, I remember going up against him more than once, and he just ran on his dial in every time, 702 on a 702 every time, and I got into the semifinals against him, and boom, he ran a 702 on a 702, and it's like, I'm just over here running, my hopped up Chevelle trying to keep up with that, and I couldn't beat it, so I hated it, what it did to drag racing. Personally, I hated it, and like I said, nothing against anybody out there that's a big drag racing fan, but there's some classes where they literally come off the line and just about snuff themselves. The computer just about snuffs them, and then they slowly pick up speed and go down the track. I mean, literally, that's no fun for spectators. I don't think that's going to happen in pulling, where it would sandbag them that much. But it takes the driver out of the equation.
It does. It puts those decision making happening at a very different spot. There's also the ability to tune some of that stuff ahead of time, and maybe it's not just using the sensors and the real-time data to make a decision, but some of that logic's already been put there. If you hit this, do that, and similar to what you were just talking about with that. So there's different levels of this conversation, and
there's a lot to think about, because now I'm looking at it. If you did allow not the traction control as it's written now, but some of this pseudo traction control we're talking about and drive by wire, we see a lot of the same vehicles winning, throughout the year, just because of talent and horsepower and whatnot. But you would almost think that if every single person was exclusively drive by wire, once those 5 tractors had gone down the track and had their finishing order, you could almost, barring major changes, just expect them to finish in that order for the entirety of the season, which would really detract from the narrative of, the points race, and the fans could potentially, I don't know, just there's a lot to think about.
I think in tractor pulling and truck pulling, you're going to have the track becomes a little more variable than, say, a track and drag racing. Again, I'm not heavily involved in drag racing.
I agree with that.
I think the conditions of your drag racing track is going to have different conditions from track to track to track. But I think your conditions for that day are going to stay relatively similar between the passes for that class that's running. Whereas in tractor pulling, yes, we could still kind of stay similar, but I think depending on the class of vehicles, you're going to see those track conditions have greater change.
And the vehicle themselves have a greater impact, and the weather itself have a greater impact on what the track looks like at the start of showtime versus the end of showtime, or the start of a class versus the end of the class. And you're still going to have, setups that are speed setups and setups that are power setups and tracks that play to and against the advance. So that's true.
Yeah. And so the whole idea of, hey, this is kind of how we finish at the beginning of the year may not be how we finish at the end of the year. There's wear and tear on equipment, and you're still going to have failures.
Those nasty words that you as a puller don't want to say.
I'm fixing one of those right now. And so I think there's a lot of variation in there. You know, as I sit here and think about this more, you know, hey, great. If I'm using traction control, I don't think I'm going to go out there and win every event. Am I going to be more consistent? Yeah, I'm probably going to be more consistent. That's kind of where my thought is on it at the moment. With that,
Mark Jaham bringing up a good point here is
absolutely
pulling order, a time of day. You know, that makes a big difference. I don't think, you know, traction control may not even help in that type of situation. Let's say pro stock 4x4 that's
I was just thinking that. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Day and night tracks, and you know, can you, if your first hook and the sun is shining bright, and you know, and there's 25 in the field, and even with traction control, could you beat the last guy that's hooking after the sun's been down for 30 minutes and the moisture's coming up? They've already built the road. So yeah, it's not a guarantee, absolutely not. But yeah, I think it does. It could increase your chances, and yeah, I don't know. I think it's something that we've got to put out there and let everybody talk about. You know, we got to put it out there where it's not this voodoo thing, you know, around the corner, and everybody, you know, nobody's really directly pointing the finger at anybody, but you hear the accusations and you're just like, you know, it's like, but we got to start talking about it more and bring it out in the open, and how we're going to deal with it, if we're going to deal with it at all, you know, because, you know, those components, and we're trying our best to police it, but, you know, those components, of course, let's say we opened it up and just said, traction control, run it, whatever you want to do. We know by supply and demand that eventually, you know, those things are going to come down in price. They're not going to be super expensive like they were when they weren't having to produce so many of them. But once they're producing a lot of them, you know, they'll start coming down in price. I mean, go try to buy parts for a small block Chevy, or go try to buy some for a small block Ford. The small block Chevy is cheaper because there's so many more out there, so many more people buying parts. So I don't know. I think this is a good start to a conversation. I think we're definitely not going to hear the end of it, because technology is moving so fast right now, and I think we're going to have to deal with it. We got to hit it head on.
Yeah, and another question I've got, you know, from a fan's perspective in the stands, does this matter?
That's what I was wondering, and that's kind of what I was talking about. Right. When the sport is good, what's best for the sport as a whole. If I see 12 trucks going down there, and I'm just an average Joe, and they're screaming and flying, and they're between the white lines, and they're consistent, and nothing's breaking, and they're finishing between 310 and 330, and there's a good number of them. I mean, you know, how much does the average fan right now, in the modern day, probably more my generation, you know, they're there to see who's going to win. They don't always fully understand maybe all the mechanical aspects as is. And with technology moving quickly as it is, myself included, you know, I am very poorly versed mechanically. So yeah, does the fan care, you know?
Well,
yeah, you know, these are all the parts of this conversation, I believe.
And when you say, do the fans care? I don't think it would affect what the fans see. I think eventually they'd see some straighter passes down the track. You know, if it's used to, you know, manipulate the brakes and keep it straight. When comparing that to drag racing, I honestly think it hurt drag racing, letting computers get in there, and because guys that could run, you know, 7 seconds are running, you know, in a 990 index, and they're snuffing the motors, they're sandbagging. The computer is just pulling the motor down, and they're not leaving the line hard. And nobody wants to go to drag race and see somebody sandbag, and they don't want to see something that can turn 10,000 RPM and scream down the track take off at idle. And that's what they're doing in some of those classes. Nothing against people. I still love drag racing.
That's a little bit of an advantage of what our sport has.
I was just thinking
you don't exactly know what that finish line is. That's a whole nother conversation. But I mean,
this in a
good way. And you don't know, am I going to have to go 310 feet? Am I going to have to go 290? Am I going to have to go 315? So where there, you're having to dial in and run this number and don't break out of that and stay there. So you've got something that you're kind of tuning to, where here it's a little bit different situation. But
yeah, Mark Ham, this is exactly what we're talking about, Mark. But that's one of the questions if you're watching the whole show is how do we regulate it? How do we police it successfully with every single vehicle and without some deceptive program that they're running to fool us?
Yeah, because if you do open it up, that point right there, that's just one more piece you got to buy. Or pieces.
But hasn't that been the age-old argument in tractor pulling for since? I mean, that's I get it. It stinks, but I feel like that's always been there and that's always going to be there. That aspect.
It is. You look at, just name the component on a pulling vehicle today.
Yeah.
There's always something that's been built better, and tomorrow I'll be able to buy something even better than what I could buy today. That's just
2 years ago. You didn't have whatever tires, and now it's if you don't have the whole shop. I mean, we've seen it with the tires over the past. We've seen 3 different makes and models of tires over the past couple of years where it's just been boom. If you're not throwing the money at those, then you're not where you need to be. So there's always the hot new thing that feels like gets you to the next spot, but potentially excludes people depending on their budget, which I don't have the answer for that.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're actually answering too many questions.
Are we bringing up? Are we going
questions
backward from where we started?
Skylar, that's an interesting question as well. That fits right into this discussion.
Yeah.
Well, the Alki burners, the big Alkis don't allow it in like the other associations where they pull, like Jeff Hurt's tractor, the fast lane or whatever. Isn't that why it hasn't existed in a long time? Because it's got that, and that's a no or something like that.
I'm not sure on that, Mike.
That's what I thought I was told, but like I said, I'm not the mechanically inclined one. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not up on his tractor and what's going on over there with that, but yeah, I don't know. EFI, of course, the E stands for electronic, and of course that can definitely be manipulated by the computer. So.
Yep.
Tyome or NHR Pro Octane cleaner units last longer because of EFI. I can see that.
And that's just it. There's also other benefits to some of this as well. I think once in a while, like EFI and things like that get a bad rap because of the nature of this conversation here, traction control and controlling things that, whereas, hey, there's times it could save stuff.
Absolutely.
With it. And end of the day, if we can keep vehicles on the track longer and more consistent, is that a bad thing? So all different angles. And
exactly, and you get into the premier classes. When I say premier classes, are the classes where no dollar has been spared in building their machines. Does it matter for those classes so much? I mean you're in a class where a lot of money gets spent.
That's what I was just
we are.
Run what you brung and hope you brung enough. I mean, what's the end of that statement,
Kyle has been thinking about that 2 drive shaft, 2 rear end thing since.
You see, took a little.
I got 2 turbines now. Maybe I got one for each rear wheel, I guess. Might be onto something there, Ron.
Murray Thornton says, talk about if someone gets caught, need to be banned and will also be labeled a cheater. Well, I think you would be banned right now under the rules, but I think what we're talking about is how you catch them and how successful you can be at catching them. So,
that's the thing as well too. If there are, you've got to think about consequences. If you do have rules, you got to follow.
Yeah. All right. Good discussion, Kyle. We might be talking about this again next week. So,
hey,
Mike, Kyle, you guys do your homework for next week, and we'll touch
Sounds
this again.
good.
I'm sure it's not going to go away anytime soon.
But it is kind of, I don't want to say maybe fun's not the right word, but it's intriguing to examine, aspects of the sport that maybe we otherwise, we're always very positive and proactive as we should be, but it's worth the discussion to look at these types of things from time to time.
Yeah, discussion doesn't hurt anything. This is one of those things. I don't think it should be kept behind a curtain or anything like that. I think the more discussion that we have out in the open about it, the more educated people get, the better decisions can be made about it.
Yeah. Marty, yeah, of course, inspections but we're talking about traction control, and you're talking about computers, and that stuff can be hidden so very easily. That's what we're talking about. Ty Omer watching the light super stock, Alki Supers, yeah. Probably could make a more consistent, as well. So, all right, Kyle, we're going to let you go.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Hey, not a problem. Thanks for having me.
Your expertise tonight and your point of view. Appreciate it.
Yep.
And we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Kyle.
Take care, Kyle.
Kyle Petch from Milford, Nebraska. Of course, they have that twin turbine tractor, Thermal Thunder.
Yep.
And Kyle is a computer programmer, for those
Yeah.
out there who don't know, and that's why I wanted his input tonight on this conversation. So just some things to think about is how we go forward. If we're going to chase, which that's the decision we've made up to this point is, and I just wanted to bring this up, that once we get all this in place to try to detect it, I don't think it's possible to detect it in every class. And in addition, like I said before, I think programs will come out to fool our detection systems.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we should open the door, because if it was up to me, I would say, no traction control, get it out of here. We don't want it, because the driver needs to be part of the equation.
Well, it's the great equalizer, I would say, in our sport too. And Kyle talked about the track. And Ron, how many times this summer did we even say, what was the biggest thing you took away from a pull? And you and I would both talk about the track itself. And then that's where you can have all the horsepower in the world and the greatest tires in the world, but if you as the driver can't put it to the ground, and if you can't pick your line, that's where you might have a little bit less ponies, or might not be turning quite the RPM, but still come out with a victory. And I think the fans, that is one of the biggest things they sink their teeth into. It makes our sport unique and intriguing. So, yeah, at its heart, we want it to be 100% driver. But the world, it's a changing place out there.
Everybody's looking for that upper hand, that.
Yep.
So Noah Mars asks no on that.
Mm-mm.
No, you cannot adjust the hitch. You cannot change your air pressure after you've scaled in Mintex. So, all right, let's do some fun stuff now, Mike. The brain's hurting here. Let's.
Yeah, it's intriguing though, but it's all good. Pulling's good no matter how you slice it.
Yeah, let's do your weekly.
We clear some smoke. Let's clear the smoke, Ron.
Yeah. Let's bring some smoke in here. When the smoke clears this week,
when the smoke clears, we're gonna go over to some Thunderbolt winners coming off a big weekend 2 weeks ago in Wisner, Nebraska. Thunder by the River. When the smoke clears this week, you will be looking at Kyle Pedley in the wide loose deer. You know, when we look back at Wisner, which is getting away from us now, a couple of weeks ago, 2 of the fastest and straightest A to B passes of the weekend when he swept. I believe he won Friday and Saturday night both, I think, at Thunder by the River. Really laid it out there. Let's check out Kyle's biography really quick. He's a bit of an independent soul, as I was looking through here. Hasn't hooked points as much as I thought he had, which he addressed. So when the smoke clears, featured driver Kyle Pedley calls it the wide loose deer. It's a John Deere 4620 in the 10,000-pound 5-inch turbocharger pro stock. He's been pulling for 20 years. He says his first hook was the Great Plains pull. And he's this I didn't fully understand. He says Great Plains pull. My guess is Rock Valley, Iowa. So was there a pull there before it was Thunder in the Valley, or I'm not sure of the history on that.
Pull or Great Plains, the organization? What I'm not sure.
Well, and maybe that's what he means. It was the Great Plains pulling up there in Rock Valley, Iowa.
Not sure.
Says most memorable hook right off this year, winning in Wisner 2024. Wildest ride, the Iowa State Fair 2006, broke the tractor clean in half. He does have 1 points championship to his credit. He was a regional points champion with a different association in 2010 in a super farm. And then he grabbed a couple of thirds and seconds. But he says since 2012, he hasn't fully ran for points. He's been kind of an independent, kind of a gunslinger, likes to show up at some of our heavy-hitting events. His biggest pulling hero growing up, watching his dad pull out of the field with the 4620. Says that's the same tractor that he's running right now, or same sheet metal on the tractor. Says best pulling advice, always be a good sport and congratulate your competition. He says his day job, he runs a family dairy farm for the Pedley Holsteins. He's the co-owner at VP Handling LLC. Pedley Brothers Repair and HP Pork, all with his brother Dave. He says his goals is he wants to run a full season for points with us. So that's his big goal, is to go after the points championship. He says his message to the fans is keep coming to the pulls and help the sport grow, and you can follow them on Wide Loose Deer Tractor Pulling on Facebook. So had a big weekend at Wisner, Nebraska. Wide Loose Deer, Kyle Pedley.
Huge. Man, just 2 beautiful passes up there. The front end would not come back down. When it looked like the front end was coming back down, it's like something magical just stopped it right there in midair. And he was hooked up. But yeah,
and emotional wins. I know we spoke with him in the winter circle, and each night, you know, he was kind of dedicating to those who were no longer with him and watching from above. So it meant a lot to him to come out victorious there.
And the answers to your question there about Great Plains, yes, Great Plains organization, and then Dick Blankspore saying 2 separate pulls at Rock Valley. One is the Outlaws, one is the Great Plains. So there's the answers to those questions. And then Dylan. We've kind of moved on, Dylan, but you can add your 2 cents there. But and we're going to continue to talk about it. You know, we got to get it out there into the open so everybody, you know, we all understand it and what we're looking at, what we're trying to regulate, and just trying to have a conversation about it is all.
Yep.
It's always been that kind of that voodoo thing behind the curtain. You know, nobody wants to really bring it out in the open and talk about it, so we're not going to do that. We're gonna face it head on here. So, yep, awesome. Kyle Pedley, that's I think he had a walk-off win one night there at Rock Valley too, so that was pretty cool. Anytime you have a walk-off win like that, have it awesome.
Big summer, but no, we want to see him. He's our featured Outlaw Puller of the Week. Come and chase those points. You know, come and play with us as any opportunity that you get. That'd be awesome. So.
Heck yeah, I hope we get a lot of pro stocks down in Lufkin, Texas too, man. That is such a cool event down there. I think the pro stock guys, we had them down there for the first time last year, and they liked it, loved it as well. So before we get out of here, Mike, a couple things. Make sure you go to Unionville, Missouri this Friday night. It says 6:30, but it's actually at 6. at the Putnam County Fair, 2 tracks. And Buckner, Missouri in Sibley Orchard at 6 p.m. on Saturday night. 2 tracks there as well, co-sanctioned with the Missouri State Tractor Pullers Association and the Outlaws. And then just want to remind everybody, we're getting closer to that contest. Somebody's going to win that Case IH tractor. So I want to play that commercial. You can go to outlawpulling.com and get signed up. I'd love to see somebody that watches the show win this tractor and that cat.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to play that commercial real quick, and we'll come back. And there you go. Wouldn't that be cool if one of our regular watchers wins that?
I would love to see that. I would love to see one of the guys that, we've got some faithfuls on here that comment week in, week out. And yeah, that would tickle me silly for one of them to walk away with that. So neat thing Case IH does with us.
Yeah. Kyle Pedley says thanks for doing that piece, Mike.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks for watching, Kyle.
Yep.
Always enjoyable to watch that tractor go down the track. So, all right, Mike, where are you going to be Friday?
Friday night, we're headed to Unionville, Missouri. I'm going to be playing with the camera. Back to the starting line. I have not run a starting line camera since Bloomfield, Iowa. Do you think I remember how to do it? It's been a while.
Gotta be careful, buddy. You don't want to
I tell you what, though, Ron, if you can't watch a pull from the announcer's booth, starting line right down there on the track with them, that's a pretty cool way to watch a truck and tractor pull. I am not going to lie. So
your ear protection is a must.
No, well, I tell you what, you don't realize, most of them, you get a good feel for it. A big mod, when you're right on top of it, with that camera, it's they're allowed going down the track from the stands or from where we call the pulls at. When you're on top of those things, that's a whole new level. You talk about, we always say, you can feel the noise. You can feel it in your forehead when you're standing on top of them. It's quite the trip.
Yeah, that I always say every once in a while one will roar by and it'll shake your brain. I swear it rattles your brain. It's like, wow, that was awesome. But Mike McCrory says, planning to go to National Oliver Summer Show in Boonville, Missouri. Then go to Buckner. See you there. Yep. We'll be there. Come say hi, Mike.
I'll be at both of them. Yep, we'll be. Of course, you'll be. You'll be the man with the plan. You'll be at both of them. So
I'll be announcing there and at Buckner as well with the announcer from Missouri State, Caden. And going to be a great weekend. The weather looks like it's going to be fantastic. By the way, primo.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
Hopefully, if my buddy down in Nenagh, Oklahoma, Dave Bennett is watching, just want to send a shout out to Dave down there. Get well soon. He'll be watching this weekend, I'm sure. He's been watching every week since the accident there. So get well, buddy. We're thinking about you, praying for you, and can't wait to get you out of there and get back home and come out and see us out here to watch some live tractor pulling. So good show tonight, Mike. Thanks for coming on. Thanks to Kyle Petch for coming on as well, his expertise. And we'll see you Friday and Saturday. Remember, if you can't be there, you can always watch it live at Outlaw Pulling TV. Thanks, everybody, for watching.
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Mike.